Hey guys, it's Reject, and today we're going to be playing some Scrap Mechanics. I've been messing around with some of the new blocks that were added months ago that are new to me, but also as well as some of the new note blocks that were added recently. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the game. So I haven't played since April, and in April, I think it was in Aprilish, they added some new blocks that I've been messing around with today. I'll just give you a quick demonstration of what they are. So there are two blocks here. The first one is, oops, what is it called? It is called a logic gate. And as you can see, there's a bunch of stuff here that looks overwhelming when you first look at it and you're not used to game logic. But it's fairly easy once you get the idea of it. Basically, these were introduced so you could use multiple switches for a door, for example. So let's go ahead and build a basic door. So now, if I hit a switch, nothing happens. But if I hit this other switch, boom, door moves, right? That's because, and if I turn one switch off, it moves back to its original position. That's because right now in my logic gate, I've got it set to AND. So if you read below on the tooltip, it says active if all linked triggers are active. So if you have 100 switches attached to this, all switches have to be turned to on for the door to open. And the way you can see that down here too is that it just shows you if you have two and both two are active, then the switch will basically be activated. If you have switches attached to it and at least one of them is off, then with the AND command, nothing will happen, and if you have all of them off, then nothing will happen as well. So now if we go to the OR command, you'll notice that if all switches are on, it still lights up. If one switch is off, it still lights up. So now what I can do is I go over here and turn this on. Boom, door. If I hit this again, nothing happens, right? Because if all switches are on, then the door is open. But if I turn both of them off, then it closes again. So it only opens if one switch is open. So I can do this, which is XOR, which active if an odd number of link triggers are active. So if I have this one turned on, oops, it opens. But then if I turn this one on, then it closes. And if I click this, it opens. So if I wanted to walk through the door, go ahead and close the door behind me. Oh, you know what? I forgot something back there. We'll open the door, walk through, and then close it behind me. It seems pretty simplistic and easy and great, but it wasn't in the original game, and people were really frustrated because you could only use one switch to do things. So if you went to a different room, you're kind of SOL. There's slightly more complicated ones here, the inverted ones, which is NAND, NOR, or XNOR. So NAND means that if they're all off, then the switch will work. If there's one that's on, the switch will work. And if they're all off, then the switch won't work. So they're all off, so the switch is active. One is one is still off, so it's inactive. Now they're both on. So yeah, so it's just like basically the inverse of them. So this one, if they're all off, they have to all be off for the switch to be active, and then this one, they either have to be all off or all on for the switch to be active. So if one of them is off, then it won't open. But if they're both off, then it will open. And if they're both on, it'll open. So this would be another way to kind of work on it. There you go. Oh, you know what? I need to go back through. But that's if you have two switches. It gets more complicated, obviously, the more switches you add. So that is the logic gate. The other thing they added was a timer. So what I can do is actually there. Go to the timer first, and we'll set the timer for 4 seconds. And I'm actually going to put this back to OR, so it makes more sense for me. So one thing I could do, actually, I'm noticing, is I could do buttons instead. I'll change the... There. So now, I can use a button instead and say, alright, hold the door open for... Oops. I think it's OR, isn't it? So I'll say hold down the button for this long, and then I can go through, and then after the delay, it'll close by itself. So if I say, open sesame, please. A little timer. And it holds as much information up to 4 seconds. So if I wanted to go doot 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 doot. So it's a way to like store memory, right? That's why timer blocks are very interesting. So that's how those are the new blocks. But what I wanted to show you is how I've been using them for music blocks. And I've been doing a lot of testing this morning because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and it is glitchy, but I'm trying to find the best way to make this work. So my first attempt here, let's go ahead and I'll turn this on. And I'll just show you what it is first. Use off, off, and off. All right, good. So I hit the switch, and I think it's set for every half second, it gives me a beat, right? So you see that? I'll show you what's actually going on here. So this button hits a logic gate, and the logic gate is set to OR. So it'll send a signal if one of them is lit up, basically. So it has to have one thing lit up, and it'll send a signal. So that then sends a signal to... should send it to here. Yeah, so it sends us to this logic gate, which is just basically set for a switch. I'll show you what happens when I turn that off. If I hit this once, if I hit it, you don't hear you don't hear anything because I've basically just got this turned off. That's what that logic gate does. So I've got that. So basically, I hit the button here. The button then triggers the bass drum. See? I can hit it a couple times. Oops. So that's how that's set up there. So I hit the button, hits this logic gate, which is set to OR. So as soon as something is active, it sends a signal, which then sends a signal here, which is set to AND. So it will only send a signal if it has all signals, all switches connected to it are sending a signal. So if this switch is on and this is sending a signal, then it'll send a signal. If the switch is off, then the AND expression is not satisfied, and so the bass drum will be off. But here's the interesting part. So just doing a little research on YouTube, what I found is this little timer cycle. So the way it works is I hit here, and it sends a signal over here, but it also sends a signal to this timer block. And this timer block is set for half a second, so it sends a signal here. And it says in half a second, that's when you're going to send a signal. Well, once it gets to the top and hits that half second, it then sends a signal to this logic gate. And normally what I could do is I could just have it go straight down, and it will just set a loop. And I'll show you how to do that actually. So if I go straight down here and hit this button, turn that off. Every half second it sends a pulse, because it sends a BAM, it says a half second send a signal, so it sends a signal here, which just sends it right back to the bottom. So it just creates a loop, right? Half second loop. But I like to be able to turn that off and on, so I created another logic gate, basically the same thing like what I've got for the note block over here, that when I hit the button, it will only loop if this switch is on. So if the switch is off, it's not going to loop. If the switch is on, hit the button, boom, loops. Completes the circuit, and we get a loop. If I turn this on, now it turns on the bass drum. So it's like, hey, cool, I've got a bass beat, right? That's set to basically 120 beats per minute, or 2 beats a second, right? So 1 beat every half second. But I was like, well, I want to add more to it, right? So I wanted to add a hi-hat. I think it's a hi-hat, or is it a snare? No, it's a hi-hat. So I wanted to go So what I did is I added, so when it looks like the way I have this set up is a little bit weird, actually. Because that should be here. There we go. So now when I send a signal, it sends a signal to this timer, which delays for a quarter of a second. So after the bass hits, a quarter of a second later, it sends a signal here to the snare. As long as I've got the snare on, which I've got the same kind of gate set up here, so I can turn the snare on. So let's test this out since I switched things around. Oops. Turn our loop back on. And then we should be able to add a snare on the offbeat. There you go. And I can take the snare out, but it's still sending a signal. So it's still telling it to wait every so often. It's just I'm taking away the signal from the snare itself, so I can take the snare in and out. So like, cool. We got a nice little simple beat going. Simple, very, very simple, basic beat. But let's add a little bit of fun, other things to it. So I've got this here, which should be connected. Looks like it is. All right, cool, yeah. So basically I've got this other little, what are these called? Snares. So I got little snares, a little snare addition added to it. So if I turn this switch on, so there you go. So it's kind of a simple little like percussion beat that I created this morning. But then I started to realize, so this is every beat basically is set to a loop, right? And we'll go ahead and turn this off. Turn off the whole looping scenario with just that one switch, which was nice. Believe me, try to figure out all of the combinations and the connections that I needed to make all this happen. It's tough. That's what took me most of the morning. But so the way I have this set up, right? So the bass beat will hit every time the loop starts, right? So that means I'm confined to that one beat. The best way I can explain this is music is so closely tied to math. If you're not familiar with how music works, the very basic beat structure of pretty much a lot of music you've heard is what's called 4/4. But so if I have one beat here every half second, so that's 120 beats per minute, which is fairly standard for a lot of like dance music. If I'm only doing a half-second loop, so that means I'm limited within that half second. What I tried to do earlier was to set it up so if this one is a half second and this one is 2 seconds, and try to get them to match up that way, it did not work. It did not work at all. This one, I don't know if it's with the coding, maybe I was doing something wrong, but like the math was right, but it was not matching up at all. There was this delay. It was really, really bad. It was not good. So I was like, okay, well, if building up from a half-second beat doesn't work, maybe I can build down from a 4-second, like a 4-second frame, and build or like a 2-second frame. Sadly, sorry, 2-second frames because we're still doing with 120 beats per minute. 2-second frame, and then break that down so that at a quarter of a second, or no, a half second, a second, 1.5 seconds, and 2 seconds, there's always going to be a beat, right? So that's what I've created over here. So it's the exact same thing. It's just broken down into 2-second bytes instead of half-second bytes. So let's see. I'll turn that on, and everything else should be off. So let's turn these off. So what I did is I created a, why is that 1.5 seconds? Really? Did I change the speed of this? I must have. Oh, so I guess I changed this one to a 1.5 second beat. So it's a little bit faster. I don't know why. Oops. Oh, it's the wrong one. I don't want to go to that switch. I want to go to this one. This logic gate. There we go. Oops. So now when I hit the button, it creates a 1.5 second loop over here, right? So there's my 1.5 second loop. So now, if I want to add the bass to it, the beat, you notice it's a little bit wonky. It's not nearly as nice as this one, this beat over here. And if you look, so this one should hit. So the way I've got this set up, this switch hits this logic gate right here, right? The start of our loop. The start of our loop. So when I hit that switch, it sends a signal to each one of these beats. So the beat on the downbeat, then off, then third and fourth, right? And so then it's a 1.5 second loop. So this one should be 750. This one should be half of 750, which is 375. And this one should be 3/4 of 1.5, which is 125. And you can also notice below it says in ticks. So a total for 1.5 is 60 ticks. So this is right on 0, 15 ticks, 30 ticks, and 45 ticks. So math is fun. But then I also added in this. And it's okay, it works. But it allows me to work within 4 beats, right? So instead of having one bass drum being the entire beat, I've got 4 bass drums to be the 4 beats in a 4x4 measure, a 4/4 measure. So that way, within that 1.5 seconds, I can build within that, right? So it all builds off of the delay from that downbeat. So that's just what I did here. Turn off my bass drums here. So if you look at this, so this one's delayed 45 ticks, so it'll hit on this third beat here. And then this one's delayed 55 ticks, so it'll kind of hit slightly after, right? But as you can tell, like if I turn the bass back on, the drum beat, it's not nice and pretty. There's like some, like if you know music at all, like that is not on the beat. Like sometimes it's a little bit faster, sometimes a little bit slower. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's operator error or the game itself, but it's not very clean. It's not very sharp. So it is what it is. And I just wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with it. It's not bad. But so I took this idea to think, okay, you know what? Why don't we just create a machine that makes music?